Hej och välkomna till Investor Update med PTX Metals. PTX Metals är ett kanadensiskt börsnoterat bolag vars målsättning är att via högkvalitativa projekt och lukrativa royaltyavtal skapa och öka aktieägarvärdet. Eftersom dagens bolag är engelskspråkigt kommer presentationen nu att fortsätta på engelska. Hello, welcome, and if you tune in to Investor Update from overseas, a very good morning to you. As always with our broadcast, if you watch this live, you can interact with the management this by adding your comment or question in the live chat. We will address your questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, it's high time to welcome Greg Ferron, CEO of PTX Metals. Hello, Greg. How are you and how are things in Toronto?
Yeah, I'm great. Nice meeting you, Carlo, and it's great to be here today. And I would like to join you someday in your studio in Stockholm. I think it'd be a lot better to do it together. But anyways, it's nice to be here today live in Toronto. Yes.
Yeah. Well, please go ahead. Take us through your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. So yeah, as mentioned, my name is Greg Ferron, based in Toronto, Canada, and I'm the president and CEO of PTX Metals. I've been the president and CEO now for about 3 years, and we've got a very interesting company. We're quoted for trading in the US on the OTC under the symbol PANXF, and we also trade in Canada on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol PTX. We're actually in the process of moving to the venture exchange as well, so the symbol will remain the same. And we built a very interesting all-Ontario-focused company, which is a great jurisdiction for mining, as I'm sure everyone's aware. It's one of the top gold-producing region. It's a large copper-nickel region as well. And it's got a lot of infrastructure and a lot of experience, and there's a real push to be developing more mines in Canada because of the critical minerals interest. And so just in terms of an introduction, we've got 2 key assets. We've got our flagship copper project located in the northern part of Ontario. You can see it in that orange triangle, and it's at the resource stage. We've got 2 fairly large deposits at surface, and we issued an exploration target earlier last year based on about 90 drill holes. So I'll explain a bit more about the strategy around that project. We're located about 75 kilometers west of Eagle's Nest, which there was quite a large bidding war. Some of the investors may remember between BHP and a firm out of Australia called Wyloo, which is linked to Fortescue Iron Ore. And they end up bidding up for about 600 million Canadian dollars for that asset. It's quite a different asset than us. We think it's the same rocks and it's the same commodities, copper, nickel. The big difference is ours is right at surface, and theirs is quite a deep, higher grade underground project. We've also put together a very strong technical team for this project, and it's very well regarded in the geological community as one of the top regions for critical minerals globally, and there's a lot of interest to really develop this new region of Ontario. And we own 100% of this project. And then we also have a 75% interest in a very interesting gold portfolio down in the Timmins camp, which is part of the Abitibi. We're on the Ontario side, and as many of your viewers would know, it's one of the world's largest gold regions, the Abitibi, which is both in Ontario and Quebec. And our exploration assets are around the Côté gold mine, and they're sort of pre-resource, but we did have a number of discoveries there last year. And then we also have an equity position of a private uranium company that's going public this year. We own 52% of that. We put our non-core assets in that, and then we also own some royalties. And we can move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, and so really what I want to cover in this slide is just to make it clear what our strategy is for our projects, and then our short-term strategy for the company. And before I do that, I just want to comment just quickly. Last year was quite a transformational year for us. We were putting in a lot of good assets. We brought in a joint venture partner. We are raising capital. We improved the board, our shareholder base, our management team. And as the technical people, as I mentioned earlier, and now this is the year where it's time to really increase the value with all that work the last couple of years. And well, one of the big accomplishments was we had bought this W2 project 3-4 years ago around that BHP Wyloo bidding war I mentioned. And we got it's quite a large package. There's two deposits, one in the northeast and one in the central area of the project. We didn't own the main deposit that has the higher grade resource, but I figured once we got it permitted, got drilling, got the team and the community's support, we would then be able to acquire that second deposit. And that's exactly what happened. So now we've got the two main deposits together, and this is what we're going to begin drilling, is that CA zone. And the other interesting thing from last year too is we were able to finally get all of the historical drill data, assays and assay certificates into a geological model, because there's been some significant operators in the past, Inco, Aurora Platinum, KWG, and then PTX. So it's very valuable to be able to get that database digitized into a 3D model, and now we can start improving, putting geology behind it. And that drilling would have cost about $25 million. And then, as mentioned, we've had some gold discoveries at our project. And then the focus now for this year is to take all that historical drilling done by good operators and convert that exploration target to a mineral resource. So what the difference between an exploration target and a mineral resource? It's the same work. It's you put it into a geological model to show the tons and grade. Just because we don't have all the historical drill core, we have to go out and confirm some of the drilling and start expanding it. So that's really the focus, is to quickly get that exploration target moved to a mineral resource, which will really underpin the valuation, because then we'll start trading with, with peers with similar sized projects. And we already have quite a large tonnage projects. We're looking at about 150 million tons between the two deposits if you use a 0.5% cutoff. And then, of course, other important things being in the northern part of Ontario is we have to be working with the community. So we want to continue to develop those relationships with the First Nations and the government in that part of the world. We want to be doing things like metallurgy to better understand the deposit. And then at our gold projects this year, as I mentioned, we made those discoveries last year. We want to now expand on trying to get those into a resource stage and expand on the success we had last year. And I think this is going to lead to a revaluation of the company. And then just short term on the corporate side, we are approved for trading on the venture exchange as of February 21st. So there'll be a transition over the next few weeks moving to that market. The CSE is a great exchange, but the venture exchange, just being part of the Toronto Stock Exchange, has better trading access globally. And it should help with the institutional investors, because that's a big push this year, is to expand our investor base with corporates, institutions, and we want to complete that Green Canada spinoff, which we'll be a large shareholder of. PTX will be, and then we're also just adding clearing into the US, so that should help improve our retail trading as well. You can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, and this just is a real quick snapshot of our copper project. You can see the region in. So this is the Eagle's Nest deposit I talked about earlier that was acquired by Wyloo. And that our project here is the W2 project. You can see that's a large land position, 250 square kilometers. So that's, several times the size of Manhattan or Paris, to put it in perspective. Barrick is our neighbor, as you can see, directly to the west. Teck just take this ground along strike from us. And then you've got the two bigger players in the camp, Wyloo and Juno, as mentioned. And it's a copper-nickel project. It's a disseminated sulfides, and you also get semi and massive sulfides, but currently we're really focusing on bulking up that disseminated resource at surface. It's only been drilled down to about 130 meters, so it's quite shallow, and it's a gabbro-hosted rock. And as we grow the deposit, we think we will also, through additional drilling, start finding more of the massive and semi-massive, where you see a spike in the grades. And as previously mentioned, there's been about 25 million spent on this property. So I think we're very well positioned this year, trading at about a 15 million market cap, to create a lot of value for shareholders with this asset, because our strategy is just to grow the resource, get it compliant, and then look to eventually get this project in the hands of some larger companies that can take it through feasibility. Next slide, please. Really quickly here, just our cap structure for investors. So there's 115 million shares issued currently, around a 15 million market cap. We've been trading kind of between 12 and 20 million market cap. We're trading close to our 52-week high, which I'll show you on another chart. And we do have a fairly large shareholder base in Europe, mainly in Switzerland and France. And we're continuing to now add institutional investors in that part of the world. A lot of family offices now own us. Some mining companies own us, like Fancamp, Alamos, NextGold. And then the board and management are big shareholders. So within those sort of three groups, you've got about 50% of the shares held in typically long-term hands, and then the balance would be in your retail, institutional, and high net shareholders that we're looking to expand that. Next slide, please. Just quickly on the management team, I'll just cover myself. I've worked in trading, corporate finance in Toronto, mainly involved in mining and energy. And then I've been involved with running a number of successful resource companies. That's what our group does. We buy projects and take it through the next phase, through permitting, through discovery, with a goal of exiting either through into production or selling to a larger company. I was involved with a company called Laramide Resources, which I think is one of the better uranium companies today. I was the CEO of a company called Treasury Metals, where when I became CEO, I guess it was about 2019, there's a lot of problems, but we were able to get the permit, get the First Nations support, make a large acquisition, and turn that into one of the largest development gold stories in Ontario. And when I left, the market cap was about 190 million. And then starting to build out a technical team. Erica's joined us to help on corporate development and manage some of the technical work. And York is the gentleman that does all the work in the field. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned earlier, we've been hiring talent that specifically has expertise in our projects. So Ryan Weston, for example, Dave Bell and Jim Mugnall all have experience in that W2 region. So they bring a lot of knowledge on our project, but other projects in the region. And then our board is on the left, and everyone can read those bios on our website. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then just before I cover a little bit more about the projects, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the market, because that's obviously very important for these resource stocks, as you can make a lot more money, and as the sector becomes in favor, and you're starting to see, the sector is highly undervalued currently, the gold producers in particular, the copper producers, but you're now seeing some of these sectors starting to break out and outperforming some of the other broader markets. For example, if you look at the gold producers, they're up about 40%. Some of our big energy companies like Enbridge and Cameco have had a nice run over the past year, and really comparable to what you're seeing at the NASDAQ and Dow. And typically, the U.S. money and the money from some of the institutions will see that opportunity, and you'll start seeing that money moving into the sector, and you are starting to see that money now trickle down with the venture exchange starting to break out. The liquidity is slowly coming back to the small cap stocks, and the copper price has had a nice move, same as the gold price. And and that risk capital is obviously returning to the sector, because you're seeing more liquidity, more bought deal financings, M&A is starting again. And you can still expect, obviously, volatility, of course, and then you had that strong dollar as well. And then the other big push, though, is just the whole energy transition. That's why this cycle may last longer, because generally when you get into a good market, in my experience, they're usually 2 to 5 years where you have a nice cycle for the juniors. But this one could be longer when it does eventually break out, just because there is such a push for this energy transition. Next slide, please. And just really quickly, these charts sort of illustrate the movement of the copper price. You can see that starting to break out. I think it's around 470 if you look at the futures right now. So it looks like it may trade up to $6 a pound. And once it gets past that 520, which is the last peak, it may break out. And you can also see on the other chart to the right here, This is a 2-year chart for the venture exchange. You can see it's now broken up above its 2-year trading range, and the liquidity is slowly returning. And that's really what you've got to watch here is once the liquidity improves in the sector, that means there's a broader interest. You'll really see these stocks break out, and I think PTX is one of the better positioned companies because we've got that great jurisdiction, a really strong team behind it, and some very high quality projects. And then the next slide, please. This just looks at our venture, our CSE trading as well as our US trading. You can see the fairly significant volume came back to the stock on the CSE and left in September. And now we've started to see some very good volume starting the last 3 or 4 months in the US. And you can see the chart in Canada, it's broken above its long-term moving average. So the short-term average has moved through the 200-day moving average, and it's looking like it's about to break out. So at about 16 cents, that should push it up into a breakout phase, and that's sort of where we've been trading now on fairly good volume over the last several months. And you can see the stock has consolidated fairly well over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then this slide here, I just wanted to illustrate that Ontario is aggressively putting in new mines in production. So, for example, around our gold projects last year, there was the second largest gold mine called Côté Gold, run by IM Gold, was put in production, and then Hard Rock, another well-known project, was put in production just north of Thunder Bay, owned by Equinox. And the point of the slide is, the government is very supportive of putting in the infrastructure. With Hard Rock, for example, they put a lot of improvements into the First Nations communities as well, so they got better infrastructure. A lot of job opportunities. So it's a real opportunity to help open up the north. And the same thing is going to happen with the region we're in. Currently, as you can see, Pickle Lake and Musselwhite are sort of the two. Musselwhite is the closest operating mine. They're going to be putting in roads and power lines coming across the east and west and up from the rail line, which will really open up this region. And I think this is a big reason why I believe our asset will get re-rated as the infrastructure comes in and we drill off that resource. It's going to make it a takeover target to have one of the largest copper deposits in that region. And you are seeing a lot of power lines in the north as well. You can see 16 remote communities up around Musselwhite and around Pickle Lake all received power last year, and that's just a trend that's going to continue. We can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, and just on the point of this slide is there's the property package, and that's where the 100 drill holes is in that central area. And I just wanted to show you the 3D modeling we've done to define these deposits. So these are quite wide. That's about a 7-kilometer strike length. These deposits are about 1.5 kilometers wide. And they're fairly well drilled, as you can see the drilling and the spacing. So what we need to do is obviously come in and just confirm, because we don't have the drill core. We have the assays, but the QP, the qualified person to do a resource, needs to have a certain amount of drill core. So that's the drilling we're doing. Last year we did a step out drilling around the AP zone, and this year we're going to drill the CA zone. Because that's the area we just acquired. So we haven't drilled that ourselves. And then the other thing you need to do, of course, is in certain cases, you need to do some more tightly spaced drilling to be able to put it into an inferred or measured category. So that's what the QPs will decide, you need to drill this area, and that will allow us to get it into a mineral resource. And so these are the 3D grade shells you can see. And then all the mag impressions here from the EM data. These are the brown areas. Those are undrilled areas, and we think that as we get out and drill that, this will all be 1 or 2 large deposits. We think that they're probably all connected, and that's another thing we want to be doing is drilling between these deposits, and we did demonstrate that in last year's program. In hole 3, for example, which I'll get to, is that you drill these undrilled conductors, you find either new deposits or extensions. So we do think that potentially this 135 million tons from the resource can double or triple with additional drilling. And just on the top here, you can see these are the resource numbers. So the 59 million tons at 1% copper equivalent, that's using a 0.7 cutoff. 135 million tons at 0.8, using a 0.5% cutoff. And we've since done further in-house modeling as we've got more of that drilling data from the past operators. And just by doing an in-house resource, we increased the CA zones by about 20 million tons because we added another 20 additional historical drill holes. And then, geologists and the big mining companies love regional potential. So the other thing that this is showing is there's another whole copper region up here called that North Limb. There's only been 3 drill holes up here where they did hit copper. And then there's 3 drill holes in this ultramafic area where there's nickel potential, and they did hit copper-nickel up there as well. And then you've got these targets out to the east that look like there are other potential mines that need, geophysics. They need some field work before you can get out and drill them. And that's undrilled, that area over there. So next slide, please. And I'm just going to sort of move through these next slides quite quickly so we can get to some questions. But this is just trying to show with our exploration target, this is already a large deposit at 135 million tons, trading at 15 million market cap in a great jurisdiction. And if you compare us to some other peers, larger deposits, of course, but these are some takeovers. For example, Eagle's Nest was taken out, as mentioned. Voisey's Bay was taken out in Canada. Solaris recently received an investment from China. And my point is, though, is as you de-risk these assets, make them larger, get them into a mineral resource, this type of project could be a takeover because it's rare to have, copper in size in a great jurisdiction at surface. Next slide. Yeah, and then I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is just more detail of that resource. We've been doing the exploration target. Now this is taken to a resource stage we've done in-house, and you can just see some of the historical drill holes. So 220 meters at 0.4. So that shows the sort of the width of these deposits, quite significant. And then you also get some higher grade. For example, you'll get 50 meters at 2% copper equivalent. And when some of the highest grades is 13% copper, 2% nickel, 11 grams of gold. And the other interesting thing about the deposit, I didn't talk too much about it. So you've got a fairly consistent copper grade across the whole deposit. And then you've also got some nickel sulfides, low-grade nickel sulfides, but then you also get a fairly significant precious metals component as well, mainly in palladium across the whole deposit. And to the east, it becomes a higher grade. So these are just some of the historical drill holes for the technical community to look at. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the program that we're going to get out and drill. This is the CA zones now. Just wanted to show you the location of the proposed holes, and we are going to put some holes between these 2 deposits. And really the point of the deposit is to get the confirmation drilling, just to bring confidence to the historical work. That drill core I talked about we need, and then also to extend these holes deeper and step out and start expanding the size of the overall deposit. So this program we're going to be getting underway with shortly. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then this is just getting into the gold portfolio. Now this is a completely different part of Ontario. It's down by the Timmins camp, as mentioned. So there's 5 operating mines within 100 kilometers of our projects, where we own the ground in purple called Shining Tree, Heat, and Mallard. And as you can see, there's the Côté gold mine, and you can see the rail lines and the roads. There's actually a road that goes right through our deposit. There's another fairly significant deposit just to the east called Juby, owned by Aris. It's about 2 million ounce open pit. And yeah, and our strategy here is we own 75% of this. These are also very large projects, about 300 kilometers. And this ride out Terrell is which hosts these major deposits, and we're doing a combination of regionally looking for larger deposits and also focusing in on the central areas where there's been historical drilling. We bought the main deposit called Ronda from Alamos. Next slide, please. And again, just want to show you, we plan to drill Herrick, where you can see some of the results we had. PTX drilled 5 meters at 4 grams. We're hoping that it can open up at depth. And then we stripped the historical mine last year, 16 meters at 9 grams, and we just did trenching across it at surface 13 meters at 4 grams. And now this year, we're just modeling that program, getting it ready, but we would like to go drill that high-grade structure. And the nice thing about this project is because of the road access, it's very inexpensive to drill, and you can access it year-round. Next slide, please. And this is just the drill program we did. So we made a greenfield discovery, which is quite rare in the sector last year. It was low grade, but over very nice widths, like half a gram over 80 meters, just 3 drill holes. So we've gone out and now sort of re-angled those drill holes and then stepped out to see if the gold extends in either way along strike. So we'll announce those results this year as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is, I think I've covered this, but this is kind of the work that we are currently doing. So I talked about all that digitizing and resource work we've done, and now we're going to get out and drill the CA zones, and then continue to do that geological work in the regional area, as well as continue drilling Rhonda and Heenan Mallard and Shining Tree. And then on the corporate side, look, just trying to get more corporate interest, trying to get more institutional interest and more retail interest, and that's the big focus, is to increase, now that I think the company is ready, is to really increase our presence within the investor community. Next slide, please. So I guess I'm going to wrap it up here and take any questions. But I'm a shareholder, and the reason I have been buying shares of this company is just because the jurisdiction, the quality of these assets, and there's a real push to develop copper projects. And I think that as we de-risk the project, get it into a mineral resource category, improve our community relations, do things like metallurgy, these projects will become a takeover target, and that's where shareholders will see a significant re-rating. And also, through the gold assets and then spinning out of that uranium company, I think will also help improve our valuation. So that's it, Carlo. I can take any questions now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Greg. If we just can elaborate a little bit of the capital structure. I believe you have a net cash position. Is that true?
Oh, that's correct. Yeah. So we have 150 million shares outstanding, and the last financing we did, we raised $3.5 million Canadian dollars. So that was completed towards the end of last year, and that's for working capital, for some of the drilling I talked about at our gold project, and then all that work I talked about for our copper projects. And then we'll look later in the year to see if we can target some institutional investors and corporate investors once we're trading on the venture exchange.
Mm-hmm. And you show us a good slide, a pie chart of the the shareholders, and it seems like you have more than half, or around half, would be non-institutions, high net worth individuals and retail and so on. Is that a fair proportion? Are you happy with that, or would you like to increase strategic or institutional or any other kind of investments there?
Yeah, I mean, the preference this year would be to try to increase the institutional investors, for 2 reasons. Now that we've got the copper project to a resource stage, that's when a lot of those institutions will come back. And 2, there is money returning to commodities like copper. So I think we'll have a good chance of tapping into that institutional, which we didn't previously do because I didn't feel the company was ready. And then obviously corporates too. Corporates are royalty companies, and corporates are making more type of strategic investments as they're looking for assets in the future that they could help develop into their pipeline. So they're making equity investments. So that's the other thing we'll be looking for.
And if I may just continue here with noticing the shareholder base, you are a Canadian listed company in Canada with assets in Canada, of course, and still you manage to have 20% European investors. How did you manage to do that? How did you get the investors on board?
Yeah, good question. Well, a lot of those, there's a lot of investors in Switzerland in particular, and Germany, that are quite active in the Canadian small cap sector. And as you know, in other parts of Europe too. That's partly why we're working with you guys to expand our investors in Norway and Finland, for example, and Sweden. There's quite a few investors in France as well. And a lot of these investors I've met with other deals we've worked on. So I've always had a large shareholder presence in Europe. For example, at Treasury Metals, at one point, we had about 50% of our shares in Europe. Laramide had a large shareholder base there, Aquiline, and then those investors generally, reinvest with the management teams they're comfortable with. And the nice thing about the European investors is they generally take a long-term view. They buy these shares and they know that there's going to be it takes time to develop the projects.
Well, fascinating there, and equally interesting is the management and the board of directors. What brought you together? How did you find each other?
Yeah, no, good question. Well, one of the board members is the founder, Jim Trustler, who stepped down from the CEO role about 3 years ago, which was a nice transition. He was an executive from tech, so he has a strong geological background. My background's more in finance. And then since then, we've added just talent that you need. So JD Moore recently joined our board. He's based in Quebec. He's a well-known there. He's a large shareholder. Federico Marx is another large shareholder, and he's a lawyer, does a lot of M&A. He worked at Vale, worked at Sigma Lithium, so he's got a lot of experience in the sector. So you want to start bringing on people like that can help as you move into like an M&A phase. Our chairman is actually based in Paris, Christophe Barrique, so he knows a lot of our European shareholders as well. And so that's and then the technical team, as mentioned, you start off with a small technical team that you're comfortable with, like York, for example. And now we've been adding that expertise as we advance our projects.
Okay, thank you for that. If we look at Canada as a jurisdiction, and also if we look at Canada with First Nations, what's the relationship there? And is there such a thing as a relationship?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that's a bit unique with the First Nations is it sort of depends what province you're in, or even in certain cases, what region within a particular province. So, for example, our gold projects being in Timmins and the Sudbury area, the First Nations are quite integrated in the mining sector. So they run businesses, they're involved in the operations, and they're very sophisticated. Getting your permits and agreements literally happen, within days. But then in other parts of Ontario, other parts of Canada, you need to develop those relationships over time. So when I was running Treasury, I took that to the environmental assessment stage, which means the mine was approved, but then you had to go through the mine permitting stage when I left. So typically at the mine permitting stage is when you start doing benefit agreements with the local communities. And so, but I've taken that kind of same type of relationship, same strategy of working with the communities with this project, even though it's only at the exploration stage, the early exploration stage. All we're doing is drilling. So yeah, I have spent a lot of time developing the relationships, and there's a real support from the First Nations to see this region develop, because they're going to benefit from the power and the roads and the jobs. So yeah, but that's something that you obviously want to keep in mind, and it's very important that you build those relationships.
Yeah. So you have a buy-in from the First Nations, and as I understand it, all nations around the world here are actually looking after their own yard here when it comes to precious metal, critical metals as a whole, and obviously Canada is in the forefront there. Could I just ask you, let's say a slightly provocative question here, but how would you like the market to view PTX Metals? Would you be a precious metal company, or is it a copper play or a gold play, or indeed should we view you as a very shrewd investment company trading in assets, undervalued assets, because you have a combination of different metals and also royalties, and B, the background from many of you in the board?
Yeah, no, very good question. And I would say probably all three, all of the above. Because I do think we are, in a way, like an investment company. because our strategy is not to take these into production. We want to do corporate development to make shareholders money. So meaning, we could spin these projects out, or we could sell them to a major, but we have to de-risk them first, like an exploration company. So I am now trying to position it now as the flagship is our copper project, because I see that's the biggest long-term value. But our gold portfolio is also very important. There's a lot of synergies keeping it within the current company. It's the same technical team, the same public company that's running it. But eventually, you're right, that may need to be spun out. But for now, we're going to focus on moving both the copper and the gold ahead. And then eventually we'll separate the assets. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I'd say all of the above.
Well, in a way, I think it's an interesting structure for the company, and bottom line here is that if you are an investor and you look at the company, there are a lot of legs to stand on, and it seems like it's not let's say balanced. It doesn't require a big balance sheet, but there is a lot of upside, and as you pointed out in one of your slides here, the sector and the demand from the underlying assets is big. Next news flow, what shall we in the market expect from you, and at what time?
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, the next news will be that transition to the venture exchange, which is great, and getting that U.S. trading or clearing. And then we'll announce the results from that Heen and drill program as well. We should have an announcement on that uranium spinoff, say by the second quarter. So that would be April timeframe. And then we'll begin drilling the copper deposit, starting to convert that exploration target to a resource. So that's going to be happening as well in the short term. So those would be sort of the main drivers. And then as we get those results out, hopefully we'll be attracting some institutional and strategic investors.
Cool, Greg. And if one would like further information, where should one go?
Yeah, the best place is probably our website. So it's ptxmetals.com. Yeah, and then there's a number of, we've got a Twitter, X link, as well as LinkedIn. So there's a fair bit of information is there as well. And then feel free to email me or call me. My contact information's on the website.
Excellent. Well, Greg, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
So thank you for you taking the time.
Yeah, pleasure, Carlo. And I would like to see you in Stockholm and do this live in person.
Yeah. Well, you're more than welcome. Best of luck. And to all of you who viewed, thank you. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.